Chapter 13. The hesitation of Lady Pembroke when they were announced was telling. Rain's mother obviously had not informed the woman that she would be attending with her daughter. Before Lady Pembroke could revoke her invitation, Rain's mother flounced in and spread her skirts and took a seat opposite Lady Pembroke. Lady Pembroke opened her mouth to protest but must have considered the fact that Lady Ancaster was a duchess, and her teeth clacked together as she swallowed whatever she was going to say. Rain could feel some pity for the woman as she knew just how stubborn her mother could be. Lady Ancaster flapped a hand at Rain, who found a seat on the other side of the room. Chairs shifted as people tried to get farther away from her. One person didn't move. Sir Laurie. He flashed her a cruel grin. I see you are an accessory today. Rain laid her hands in her lap and ignored the comment. She was here for her mother, and from experience she knew silence was the better part of valor. Rain curled her hands in her lap. Her metal hand half hidden under the pale yellow glove, on her opposite hand, that matched her light-colored dress. When she wasn't in her uniform, it was her habit to wear something that made her feel amazing. No stays or corsets, instead perfectly tailored gowns. Today she wore a one-piece dress with a drawstring waist. The skirt ended at her calf-high boots in light tanned leather. Sir Laurie tried again. Don't you find these things tedious? Rain had a choice. Sit there in silence and be very bored, or engage with Sir Laurie even if the conversation made her feel like taking a bath afterwards. Boredom was never her first choice. Sometimes, when I have to talk to people with a mean core who find insulting others second nature, I find these outings very tedious. He didn't seem slighted that she had implied he was mean, and instead shrugged. It is more about political expedience. I am an influential person after all. He cocked an eyebrow. It was worse when the person she wanted to insult already acknowledged that they were odious. But he also wasn't wrong. I'm aware of that. On the surface I look like someone who has lowered themselves to having an actual trade. But you forget that the highest-ranking nobles are those with ties to the dragons, and dragons like noblemen with a trade. It makes us unique. He snorted. You think your appendage will make you desirable to the dragon? He doesn't take anything unique. You know that woman he married? Well, she was a commoner. A nobody. Spitting with the vehemence of his words. Rain's mind went sharp. The anger in Sir Laurie's voice meant his association with Eleanor was personal. The only people from this layer of society to have met the women were her victims. Rain turned in her seat, then stopped herself. She didn't want to reveal to Sir Laurie that she was interested in the answer. Did you know Eleanor? Sir Laurie grimaced, revealing his teeth. That whore was beneath my concern. Rain would take that as a yes. Rain narrowed her eyes and dug a little deeper. Interesting, as you were governor when she married the dragon. You would have been at the same balls. Surely you would have met. They were married less than a week. She only attended one ball. In this gaudy gown and dripping in jewelry. Jewelry the dragon had given her. Her tone digging into his pride. Did you ever give her jewelry? He fidgeted, agitated by the conversation. Smoothing his fingers over his facial hair. She sold my grandmother's brooch. Can you believe that? He paled when he realized what he had revealed. Rain asked, so were you aware she was a con man? His voice tipped towards being a little too loud for the polite conversation allowed in sitting room. A con man? No, she was a con man. Really? Yes, her partner was Sebastian. They were lovers and conned people out of as much wealth as possible. It is amazing what you can find out gossiping at an inn. Sir Laurie gaped. His pale skin flushed with embarrassment. He tried to recover and snapped, a great deduction, officer. I've never had a great regard for Robert's men. Is that because of our wit, or because some of us are not as honorable as you are? She wasn't ashamed to throw herself into the mire that were her colleagues. Sir Laurie sniffed. I'd say your wit, but I know your father would have made sure you were well educated. A complete waste in a female. His insult delivered awkwardly, he stumbled to his feet just as ungraceful as his words. He muttered an excuse of a meeting he had forgotten. The rest of the ladies and gentlemen looked confused but didn't stop Sir Laurie from leaving. Lady Ancaster narrowed her eyes at Rain, who gave an innocent shrug. It was never a good sign when men desperately tried to escape. Catherine wore an oversized leather apron that was folded at the bottom and pegged to keep it rolled up. This was essential as the apron was long enough to get under her feet. Catherine also wore leather gloves that were a size too big, and she left her hands held up so they wouldn't slip off. At least this was the way Rain found her sister. Rain said from the doorway to the basement room, "I thought you were going to start with animals." This was said because on the table in the middle of the room was a body of a man covered by an old sheet. Catherine flashed her a grin and said, "I got lucky." One of Dad's contacts said they had a body of a murderer that they were willing to sell. Catherine waved a hand at the body. Her exuberance at the opportunity had her bouncing on her toes. "He has tattoos all over his body. He was a pirate, apparently. He is too dead to try to bring back to life, but I'll be able to see where everything is inside the body. Maybe figure out what everything does." Rain shook her head at the obvious glee in her sister's voice. She was used to bodies, but even she didn't get excited over cutting one open to see what was inside. Approaching the table, she looked down at the man. He had scars and looked like a wax model rather than a ruthless pirate. Catherine asked, "Will you help? I can't let the servants see this. Dad is pretending it is for Everett to study medicine, but the servants would know that was baloney, so they can't help." Rain looked around and saw several sets of gloves laid out on a table to the side. Her sister had come prepared. She found one to go over her hand and tucked a cloth in her pocket to clean off her mechanical hand when this was all done. Together they moved tables and things into place so Catherine could place the organs into containers. Rain asked while they were setting buckets around the table, "Would you consider chemistry a hobby or a lesser science?" Catherine grunted as she shifted a table closer and stood back to eye it. "Hardly. There is a lot you can do with chemicals." "Are you talking about the dragon?" Rain eyed her sister, curious how she had jumped to that conclusion even if it was correct. "Why would you say that? Only a dragon would consider chemistry a lesser science. They are physicists. Anything that gets icky is considered lesser to them." Rain eyed the multitude of buckets and pans and knew this would get messy very soon and very quickly. She wondered what Victor would think of it all. He has a lab, so obviously he doesn't think that. What is the difference anyway? She grunted, as the heavy basin she grabbed looked lighter than it actually was. Bending her knees, she tried again and shifted it to where it was needed while her sister answered her question. Most dragons only work with things at their smallest. Chemistry in comparison would be crude. Like painting with your fingers instead of a paintbrush. Victor isn't crude. Rain blushed at her quick defense of the dragon. No one would believe she had no feelings for the dragon if she said things like that. Thankfully, her sister was oblivious. Catherine finished setting up and picked up a small knife. She frowned at her gloves and then made a choice and took them off. She grinned when she handled the small knife. "I wouldn't call Victor crude either, but he is nostalgic. Chemistry and biology would be where the dragon started." So much for her sister not noticing as she came back to the conversation as if she hadn't been quiet for a couple of moments. "Biology?" Rain asked, though she was pretty sure she knew the answer. Acting dumb usually got interesting tidbits from her sister. Catherine motioned to the body on the table. "Study of life." The dragons would consider this barbaric. They would be able to just look at the body and know where all the organs are. They would also be able to tell what killed the man. She waved towards the neck where the dark bruises where the hangman's rope had strangled the life out of the man was visible. Her sister swam in waters that Rain didn't and therefore knew different things to what she did. What do you mean? To be able to manipulate something you have to be able to observe it. They don't see it with their eyes but rather feel where everything is and what it is made of. Dragons would make great detectives. Catherine cut into the body and Rain found herself looking away as the skin split way too easily under the sharp blade. Catherine said, "You can go now. I'll be at this for hours." Rain took the excuse and left. Scrubbing her mechanical hand more than was truly needed when she stopped at the washstand in her room. Chapter 14. Larkin lurked at the door to the press while Rain looked through a stack of plates. He had stopped helping her look for peelers in the plates 2 newspapers before. Rain wasn't sure if he thought the whole task frivolous or if he worried that they would succeed and uncover a peeler as the suspect for Sebastian's murder. He had been inordinately pleased when Markham had ended up dead rather than her having to arrest him. Rain had apologized when she had taken in all the factors. He might be tarred with the same brush if anything happened to her. His silence had been more support than she had expected. That made this hunt problematic for him. It was almost like Larkin didn't want to uncover the killer but was also drawn to solving the case at the same time. Realizing she had been staring at the same plate for over a minute, she shook herself. The clacks of the press in the other room kept her aware of the time that had passed, constant they had invaded even her thoughts. She sighed and put aside the plate and picked up the next one. Larkin asked, "What would you do if it was Lord Rowan?" The question surprised Rain but showed that Larkin had been wrestling with this longer than she had. She hadn't considered that. All she had thought was no matter who it was deserved justice. She did hesitate when she thought of Lord Rowan possibly being the killer. "I doubt it is him. He is too honorable." It would break her mother's heart to even think of her childhood friend being capable of killing someone and then framing the dragon for it. Eerily contradicting her comments to Sir Laurie and his narrow-minded view of people, Larkin said, "Most of the peelers are. But there is a point that can push even a good man into doing evil. Maybe they thought they were doing the right thing. What if he knew more about the matter and was actually trying to save someone? We don't know enough to just hunt down whoever it was with prejudice." Rain wasn't so sure of the other peelers and their honor. Some had propositioned her or revealed their hatred of women by a word and by ostracizing her. None of those traits would have made her think they were honorable. Larkin would see it differently, as he would have only seen the side of them that spent their days helping others. He would assume all the men were like him just because they did the same thing. Rain stopped at a plate and said, "I was thinking more on the lines of being highly cautious instead of pursuing anything with prejudice. I don't want to be killed because I brought in the murderer of a con man and his lover. Even when I know the killer, I'll probably keep it between us until I can find more. Besides, I don't think anyone will be able to do anything about it at the Metropolitan Police. After all, they knew Markham was a blackmailer and all they did was fire him. I need a more permanent solution for our killer for us to be safe." She had taken to wearing the flintlock her mother had given her. It even glistened with hours of polishing. Fields would be proud of her. She held the plate up to Larkin and asked, "Who does this look like?" Larkin narrowed his eyes as he looked at the plate. "Mains. I didn't know he had glasses." He took the plate from her hands to have a closer look, taking it over to the door and the light outside. "He only wears them when he is reading," she revealed, as Larkin never came to report to the man, so wouldn't have seen him poring over the files with a set of spectacles on his nose. Larkin shook his head. "Mains is way too straight-laced to kill anyone. Like that had ever stopped someone who had a reason to kill. Besides, she was pretty sure he was the one who had spread the rumors that Victor was a suspect in Sebastian's case, even though there was no evidence. If he was the real killer, then him turning the blame onto another made sense. Even him assigning her to the case made sense. He didn't have much respect for her and her abilities. He had probably hoped she wouldn't find any evidence. They hadn't really, not enough to tie Maines to the murder in any case. Just the publican's word, and they didn't even know if this was the image he remembers from the newspapers. He is the only peeler we have seen in the newspapers. They had searched almost all of them, so she could say that with some authority. Larkin was still skeptical. That we know of. The other plates could have been lost or the newspaper no longer around. You don't know this is the only picture of a policeman to be in the papers. Rain shrugged, but the more she let this clue sit inside her head, the more it made sense. But she would keep it to herself for the time being. Now she would have to convince the newspaper that she could have the plate. Rain let Larkin think he had won the battle when he made her take the plate to the innkeeper to see if he recognized the image. She would have done that anyway in the hope that the image would help the innkeeper remember other details that could be helpful. Besides, there was no way she would be going after one of the heads of the Metropolitan Police Force without solid, irrefutable proof. Smoke curled over the tops of the buildings and flavored the air. Men ran past them with whatever container they could carry. The roar of the fire became more evident as they turned the corner. People passed over buckets and containers down a line from a fountain 2 streets down. They didn't bother with the building itself, but rather the buildings next to it, frantically making sure the fire didn't spread to the vulnerable structures. Rain stared in disbelief as she watched the maiden's hair sag and collapse under the inferno. Sparks burst into light, then faded as they used up all their energy. Larkin asked, suspicious. Someone covering their tracks? I hope not. Because that would mean they are still one step ahead of us and we are running out of leads. It bothered her. She hadn't spoken with anyone of what they were looking for. As far as Maines knew was that they were working on new cases and that the murder had been shelved until new evidence was uncovered. Larkin was the only one who knew they were still looking, and he was so reluctant to speak with her about the whole thing. She knew he wouldn't bring it up with Rosie, let alone one of the other bobbies at the yard. The killer could be panicking, but it was weeks since the murder. It was unlikely that was his thought process. On the other hand, it could all be an accident. But it just didn't feel right to Rain. She searched the crowd to see if she could find the innkeeper or the man who had been helpful last time. Hopefully, they could salvage this in some way. Before they could search the whole crowd, they were dragooned into helping with the buckets of water, their uniforms too distinct for them to pretend they were civilians. Besides, in situations like this everyone put in a hand. The danger of the city burning was too high of a risk for people to stand by and do nothing. It was dark by the time they headed back to the yard. Though she wasn't sure what the hour was. Covered in soot, her arms ached from passing over buckets of water. One thing about putting out the fire, they had been around long enough to know the innkeeper had been inside his establishment when it went up and he hadn't made it out. Exhausted, she resisted dragging her feet as she stepped over the threshold of the office foyer. A runner dashed in front of her and then out the door, almost tumbling her over in the process. She called out a sharp, "Hey," but the boy was already well down the block and out of earshot. She turned back inside, too tired to be even mad at the boy. There was a commotion inside as well. Officers huddled in groups and gossiped like mamas sizing up men for their daughters, while others rushed from place to place in seeming random fashion. Charles Rowan appeared at the top of the stairs and used his baton to tap on the railing to get everyone's attention. Everyone silenced and stood where they were to hear what Lord Rowan had to say. The former Governor of London, Sir Laurie, was murdered last night. We will all be working on this and we will have meetings starting in an hour so we can catch this criminal. The air left her lungs. It was clear everyone already knew this news. Charles rattled off the names of officers who would be in charge of different aspects of the case. He then disappeared back into his offices. Fields spotted her standing like a stunned mullet at the door and barked, "At it, men." Startled to be lumped in with the others, Rain moved before she even thought of what she could do to help with the investigation. Larkin broke off from her side to join one of the huddled groups. When he returned, he said, he was found dead in his own home. bashed in the head with a paperweight. The circumstances sounded surprisingly similar to Markham's death. Another panicked attack to cover tracks. Sir Laurie also recently found out that Eleanor was a con man. Had he been working with someone? Someone he had revealed to that he now knew Eleanor was a con man. Rain winced as she remembered bringing up the fact she had gained this knowledge from talking to people at the inn. The killer must have gotten that out of Sir Laurie before he died. That was why they had taken out the inn even though it was weeks after Sebastian's death. When people started looking into Sir Laurie's death, they discovered he hated Victor. A long-standing rivalry that many had witnessed. Then the papers announced a connection between Sir Laurie and Victor. His wife Eleanor had been Sir Laurie's mistress. That put Victor back up to the top of the list of possible murderers for not only Sir Laurie but also Eleanor, as people started to speculate that he had discovered this and killed her in a jealous rage. They retroactively assigned to Sir Laurie his reasons for pardoning Sebastian because of his suspicions. The newspapers speculated that the dragon had only returned to silence Sir Laurie, who had new evidence. None of the newspapers asked her what her thoughts were on the case, even though she was the one investigating Sebastian's death. Victor was clever enough to keep a low profile and he stopped going to balls and outings. A small group of protesters set themselves outside his house. Not quite a mob, but certainly unsettling. Rain didn't worry that it was Victor behind the death of Sir Laurie. Like her speculation that a dragon would merely eat any offending human he managed to kill, she didn't think he was passionate enough over Eleanor or Sebastian to have killed Sir Laurie so many years later. The newspapers made links as well. After all, Sir Laurie had Sebastian pardoned years before. How they found out Sebastian had once worked for Sir Laurie was interesting, but none of the papers connected the dots to figure out the con Sebastian and Eleanor had been involved in. Even if they weren't into lurid speculation about the relationship between Eleanor and Victor. The attacks started to happen the next night. Random people on the street were attacked. Robbed and beaten up. When asked who did it, they all said it was the dragon. Rain had tried to see Victor, but he had been scarce at his residence as well. She wondered if this would draw the dragons from Europe. They wouldn't tolerate one of their own breaking the treaty, and they would also not tolerate humans putting to death a dragon. When a dragon from Europe arrived, a ball was thrown in his honor. Even Rain managed to get an invite despite the result of her last outing with a dragon present. Maybe they thought she would be able to get the dragon to reveal his true colors. Lady Beechworth said by Rain's side, "I see you went with the gold." Rain had returned home too late to have a say in the gown. Her mother had put it out and had it prepared. She would have preferred something that didn't show so much skin. Her arms were bare and the single gold glove on her one hand made her other look like she was wearing a matching glove on her mechanical side. That was the only reason she had gone along with the dress in the first place. But it also showed her collarbone and the puff sleeve engulfed her shoulders. It also didn't cover up the brace that held her hand in place. The boat-cut collar revealed too much of her cleavage for comfort. Her bobby uniform usually covered everything, but this outfit revealed just how endowed she was. "It isn't for the dragons," she reassured Lady Beechworth. "There is only one dragon here tonight." Lady Beechworth motioned to the other side of the ballroom. There were two people standing alone. Unlike before, there were no tittering women and the ambience was certainly hostile. The couple stood together, oblivious to the cold shoulder of those around them. The woman was dark-haired but otherwise nondescript and most likely the dragon's mate. In Rain's mind, she had lumped the woman with the dragon. She shouldn't, as the woman wouldn't have the same powers, but it was automatic as the two worked in sync with each other so seamlessly. They were true partners. "What can you tell me about them?" Rain studied the male dragon. He was large and did not seem very cheery. The woman kept up most of the conversation while he listened with a slight frown. "They are fixers," Lady Beechworth said after a slight shrug of her shoulder. Rain snorted at the concept. The woman, in a beautiful blue gown, was a delicate flower against the wall that was the dragon. Lady Beechworth frowned at her dismissiveness. I'm serious. Whenever there is trouble, they send those two. There was a man hunting dragons when I was a little girl. He ran here when the dragons started hunting him. These two were the ones to chase him down and put him out of his misery. Rain glanced at Lady Beechworth. She was well into her 50s. If she remembered these two from when she was a little girl, then the woman was much older than Rain had expected. Rain asked, "Dragon mates live as long as dragons?" She gathered from the anecdote. Yes. These two are the most obvious, as they go all over the place and mix with humans. Most of the others who mate with dragons eventually move away from society. I think it would be hard to keep watching all your family die. Rain had to agree, but she now thought more about Victor's offer of marriage. So far, no dragons had died from old age, though she doubted anyone would know if they had. Dragons were notorious for keeping their own secrets. She could see why women would suffer a kind of slavery to a dragon if they could stay young for a very long time. Rain pointed out the lack of sycophants and asked, "Is society aware that they are fixers?" That might explain the lack of people courting the dragon, but it could also do with the newspapers or the fact that he was already taken.